My new book, Pillars for Life, A Guide to Spiritual Ethics and Practice, is now out and available for you to read and purchase. You can check out our website, willowhealing.org, to find a link, or you can find it on Amazon. We look forward to getting your feedback, and if you love it, please leave a review and share with your friends. Now it's time for the show. Welcome to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We are so excited to have you joining us on this journey where we explore different ways to empower your soul, whether it's healing in your kitchen or all the way up in the corporate world. Come with us as we look into different ways to heal your mind, body, and soul. Hey everyone, it's Catherine Cristani with another episode of Willow Healing Matters, and today I am joined by Dr. Leah Kayla. She is a licensed clinical and prescribing psychologist who has served as the FBI's sleep expert for over 5 years. With a passion for optimizing human performance, she's on a mission to help others harness the transformative power of rest, because better sleep shouldn't be top secret. Dr. Leah shares practical science-backed strategies on her YouTube channel, and her upcoming book, The Sleep Advantage, hit shelves on October 1st, 2025. So it'll definitely be out when you're all listening to this. So a big welcome to the show, Dr. Leah.
Thank you so much for having me. And funny story, I should let you know that it was called The Sleep Advantage, and then we realized that title was already taken. So we have decided to change, and now the title of the book will be If Sleep Were a Drug.
Oh, I like that. You know,
I
as a
do
mom
too.
that was so sleep deprived for so many years, I understand why sleep can feel like a drug. Fully do.
Yeah, it's we picked the title because you can think about it in a lot of different ways, and it's very intriguing. So yeah, unfortunately the other title was taken. Luckily we found out before the book came out, so we switched it up.
Amazing. Well, I'll make sure that they're right in the show notes for everyone watching this later. So that is easy. And then we'll put a link to the book when it
Perfect.
comes out. So then when everyone's listening to this, they don't even have to think. They can just click and buy and learn that they really need more sleep.
Everybody needs more sleep, but perfect. Thank you so much.
So I guess what pulled you to becoming a sleep expert and working with the FBI, and how did it there's a story.
There is a story. I definitely stumbled into it. There's no doubt about it, because sleeping is one of my favorite things. I love sleeping so much, but that hasn't always been the story. Yeah, wasn't always the greatest sleeper. Like, I think back to my days in college, I was a collegiate gymnast, and I'm also an early bird, so I love waking up early. I would pick the earliest courses. I would go to class, I would go to the library, I'd go have lunch, and then I decided, oh, like, this is the perfect time for me to go take a nap, and not just like a tiny nap, but like a 3-hour nap. And then I would go to gymnastics practice, I would go to dinner, I would go back to the library, and then it was time for me to go to bed. And I couldn't figure out like why I wasn't that sleepy, and like, is there something wrong with me? And do I need some type of over the counter medication or something stronger? And fast forward later in my education, when I was finishing my PhD, I am on my residency, which is your final year of your PhD, where you have to do a bunch of different rotations in order to be just super well rounded before they let you go out onto your own and work under your own license. And there were several rotations that I really, really, really wanted. And then you kind of also have to compromise. So all of the interns, all of the postdocs, we all come together in one room, and no one's leaving until everyone is like relatively happy. So we'll guarantee that you get a couple good ones, but then you're probably going to have some compromises. And I remember the two that I really, really wanted, which was going to be community emergency services and like a forensic rotation. But I can't remember if I actually wanted the sleep clinic or not, or if that was just a compromise for me. But I'm extremely lucky that I got a chance to go work in the behavioral sleep clinic for a rotation, because it was just so incredibly valuable to and eye-opening to see how many people are struggling with sleep, how many people are not getting good sleep, and then also just the spectrum of struggles that people are having with sleep, whether that is trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, nightmares is a huge thing, especially at the VA, working with a lot of veterans who have seen a lot of combat trauma. Also, obstructive sleep apnea, and a lot of people having a hard time wearing their CPAP machine, which is a mask that goes over your face. So just a wide spectrum of people struggling with sleep. So that's where it all started. I really enjoyed myself, but didn't know that it was going to take off the way that it did. So, my first quote unquote real job, like I moved from the VA and I go over to the FBI as a psychologist. And my supervisor on like one of my very first weeks was like, "Okay, Leah, so what's going to be your thing?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I just got off a sleep rotation. Like, how about sleep?" Because whenever it comes to mental health, I think that there's still a fair amount of stigma. I think that we're getting much, much better in society. But I think whenever you put on the layer of law enforcement and you put on the layer of, being this most elite law enforcement in the entire world, that there is some stigma around, what's going to happen to my job, what's going to happen to my clearance, my gun, my badge, all those things. And so I thought, well, if we start with sleep, because everybody can relate to having a crappy night's sleep, whether you've got pain, whether you have a new baby, whether your pet's waking you up to go out in the middle of the night, like everybody can relate to having a crappy night's sleep. And so I thought, let's just get started there and I'll kind of get my foot in the door and I will be available for people who want to talk more about sleep, to work on their sleep. And I kind of figured that that would open the door to even more things than actually talking about uh, mental health conditions, because my two specialties are trauma and sleep. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. Was I have made my name within the FBI for being this sleep expert now for 6 years. And I get tons of referrals from my fellow mental health professionals. And a lot of times they're like, "Hey, I have someone who's struggling with sleep. Do you have an opening on your caseload?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course, send them over." And I think that this is very specific to the population that I work with, right? That's like agents and professional staff and joint task force officers, that a lot of times it looks like it's a sleep issue. And no doubt about it, people are struggling with sleep, but it's more so an underlying issue of untreated anxiety, depression, trauma. So that's where it all got started. And I think that it just completely took off as far as people being hungry for how to better their sleep, how to feel better, because I think that sleep, I will be the person who makes this statement of, I think sleep touches everything. I don't think that you can make a
Mm.
case for just about anything, whether it's emotional, physical, cognitive, that sleep doesn't touch. And I have just become so incredibly passionate about teaching people science-based strategies that are free, that are relatively easy, that they can use to better their sleep. So that's how it all got started.
Wow. I love that you just kind of got almost guided into that, but also how you can use sleep as a stepping stone into talking about the deeper things that people are really coming into you to see you for, and that it's almost like this bridge between the two. And like I said, I fully understand how sleep deprivation can impact on all those things because my son was a terrible
Mhm.
sleeper, like so terrible.
Yeah.
I remember driving to, I think it was the chiropractor appointment to actually help him with his sleep and going, how did I get here? Did I stop at the
Mhm.
traffic lights? And did I park the car and actually lock it? Because you
Yes.
don't even know how you're still functioning. You're like in this zombie kind of zone moving forward. And like you said, it does impact your cognitive, your emotional, because when you're like that, you're so short tempered too, because you're like your
Yes.
immune system and your nervous system's already afraid.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Whenever it comes to sleep deprivation, no matter what the cause is, and whenever I say the word sleep deprivation, I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, that's not me." But whenever we're talking about adults, and that would be age category like 18 to 64, the recommended amount of sleep time for each night for adults should be 7 to 9 hours. So when we're talking anything less than 7 hours, and we're talking chronically, so night after night after night, that's when we get into a term called sleep deprivation. So I think a lot of people have the idea of this term is reserved for people who have been up for days or there's something wrong with them. No, not necessarily. Like whenever we continue to starve the body of the sleep that it needs night after night after night, yeah, we're going to see these very serious consequences, just like what you're describing.
Yeah. And I feel that's such an important thing, like you said, night after night after night, because I know
Hmm.
personally I can do a 6 hour night and I'm okay. But if I do 2 or 3 of those nights in a row, I'm not okay. Especially after bringing it back from being that extreme sleep deprived as well.
Right. And I think, you make a great point is it's important for us to normalize this, right? Like there will be nights where you just get a crappy night's sleep. Maybe you're in a little bit of pain, or maybe you've had too many fluids close to bed or something like that. Or maybe your mind is just racing from some type of news you got that day. It is not unusual to just have a crappy night's sleep here and there, or maybe even a couple in a row before we start to get into the territory of something that's going to be diagnosable. So yes, it's not unusual to have that crappy night of sleep here and there. That's normal.
So, yeah, and that's what I like too, that you're saying it's normal. It's
Yeah,
normal to
sadly,
have.
it is normal.
We all feel crabbier in the morning for it, but it is normal and you can bounce back from it. Actually, I
Yes.
have to laugh because, I just, you kind of can choose your mental state to a point until you get so just sleep deprived you can't. But I'd rock up at work and like the night before I was up later due to like some commitments and things like that. And like my clients would be like, hey, you look tired, but you're really happy. And I'm like, I can be happy. I'm excited. Like, I've got this going on and this going. And they're like, are you on drugs? And I'm like, no, I just had a really good solid sleep. I said, I know I didn't get full on sleep, but I had, and that I think that's too something that's important, the quality of your sleep, because sometimes people can sleep for hours, but if they're not getting into that deeper sleep, then it's almost rubbish sleep almost, but because they're not getting that deep restoration that they need from that really deep sleep.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that this is also, I think that there's so much mystery behind sleep, if you will. And that's why I like talking about the science behind it, because you're talking about these people aren't getting into this deep restorative sleep. And you're exactly right. There are various different stages of sleep that we will cycle through each night. Again, if you're a normal average healthy sleeper, as I like to say, because there will be some people who are listening who probably have a diagnosed sleep disorder, or maybe aren't moving through these stages for some reason or another. Maybe it's a medication, maybe it's a medical condition. There may be issues with the way in which they move through the sleep architecture. But I think it would be valuable for me to give kind of just like in a nutshell what that looks like. And so at the very beginning of the night, as we're starting to fall asleep and our eyes are getting tired, we're starting to get that head nod, like we're just having a hard time keeping our eyes open. That's going to be like what we call stage one, is we're in this super, super light stage of sleep. We may hear something or someone might wake us up and we're like, I wasn't sleeping. So that's very, very light stage one sleep. And it kind of helps transition us into stage two light sleep, which is going to be a little bit deeper. And then we're going to move down into deep sleep. And this is also called slow wave sleep. And as we're in this deep, slow wave sleep, it's really important. I like to think about it. All the stages of sleep are super important for lots of different things. And I'm not going to get into the weeds here too much, but deep sleep is wonderful for your physical health. So your blood pressure should be dropping. Your blood vessels should have a chance to relax. Your muscles should be relaxing. There's going to be a lot of repair and restoration of all the wear and tear that our bodies go through all day long. Also, your organs should get an opportunity to have a rest break. And then so our biggest chunk of deep sleep happens in the first few hours of sleep. And then we'll move up into REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement, REM, REM. And we're only going to spend a tiny bit of time there, and that would be one cycle. Then we're going to do it all over again. So we're going to drop back down into light sleep. We spend the majority of our night in light sleep, about 50%. Then we'll drop down into deep again, and then we'll pop back up into REM. That would be a second cycle. So cycles normally last about 90 minutes, and our normal average healthy sleeper will cycle through about 5-ish cycles a night. So as we get closer and closer to the time where our alarm clock is going off, that's when we're going to get the biggest chunk of REM sleep, that rapid eye movement sleep. And REM sleep is most often where dreams occur. And it's also very important, like you said, for our kind of emotional detox, for kind of feeling much better, kind of taking the sting out of emotional memories or things that have happened to us, and just kind of being able to do this detox. But also, as we sleep, it's going to be very important for innovation and creativity and problem solving. And then also just our memory too. And now I'm kind of talking more broadly across all the stages of sleep that work together to take in all the information that we have collected all day long through all of our senses. I mean, it's just an insane amount of information. And the brain doesn't need to hang on to all that, nor should it. And so at night, it's shuffling through, figuring out what's important, what's not important, where do these things need to go. So it's being moved from short-term memory to our long-term storage. But also, not just that, we're not just like heaping all of these memories onto a pile, but instead they're being filed in a very specific way. So we already have knowledge. So if you learn something new, say, for example, you already have a workflow, but you learn a shortcut or a new way to do it, well, that memory needs to go in a very specific spot and be kind of integrated into this existing neural network that we already have. And so sleep is also responsible for figuring out where this goes within your existing workflow so that it makes sense and that it flows even better. So there's just so many different things that sleep does. And I think to your point there about feeling better emotionally, physically, cognitively, feeling like you're on point, that's what sleep does. And that's why it's important that we give ourselves the opportunity to sleep enough every single night to show up as our best every day.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point to remember. And so I have a question that when you were sharing that. So when people
Yeah.
have power naps, what does that actually mean? And does it actually help if people have power naps to recharge? I know you were touching on that when you were doing your 3-hour long naps when you were in college.
Yeah. So when I was back in college, yeah, don't listen to what I say, not what I do. That was way before I worked in the sleep clinic and had knowledge. So that was me making a major mistake. Whenever it comes to power naps, so the amount of nap matters. And let me just say this first, and then I'll jump into naps. The reason why I wrote this book is because there are so many people struggling with sleep. And there are so many ways that we can get in our own way, if you will, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I wrote this for people who are struggling because there's so many people, like everybody sleeps, but chances are there are just a vast majority of people struggling with sleep issues. And, as we mentioned, there's a whole spectrum of various different things that people could be struggling with. But I think one of the major issues, and especially as I think about my first responders, my law enforcement, my military, my veterans, that it's having a hard time falling asleep and having a hard time staying asleep. And so if you are the person who's listening to this who has a hard time falling asleep and a hard time staying asleep, I don't recommend naps. And here's why. All day long, you have what we call sleep pressure building up. So after you wake up from a full night's rest, your sleep pressure should be very low. And sleep pressure is also the chemical adenosine building up in your system. So as the day goes on, it should build and build and build and build, and it'll be its highest peak before you feel sleepy around your bedtime. And that's important. That's what adenosine does, is it works together with your circadian rhythm, and they kind of come together. They work independently, but they come together and they create this sweet spot for us to feel sleepy and to be able to go to bed. And that sleep pressure also helps us stay asleep throughout the night. So if you're someone who has a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, one of the reasons why I don't recommend naps for you, and this is just very like blanket advice, obviously there's going to be tons and tons of people listening, but I'm just going to say a little bit about that, is as our sleep pressure should be building all day, well, if you take a nap during the day, and depending upon how long that nap is, you're going to let out some of that sleep pressure. So as it gets time for your bedtime, you aren't going to be as sleepy as you should feel. As you brought up those 3-hour long naps that I was taking in the middle of the day, yeah, I was relieving a ton of the sleep pressure. So it was no wonder that when it was time for my bedtime, that I'm wide awake. I can't figure out what the problem is. I can't fall asleep. Do I need a sleeping pill? What do I need? So that was me getting in my own way. Now, if you're somebody who just loves this podcast, you listen to every single episode, you're not having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, then naps may be an option for you with a couple of caveats. So I recommend not napping past like 2 p.m., I would say. So we don't going to get into the late afternoon. So earlier in your day. And then I would also say no more than 20 minutes. That's a good sweet spot, because a really short nap, like closing your eyes for 5 minutes, you're not really going to get a ton of benefit. But whenever we get into like 10, 15, and even 20 minutes, you are going to get some cognitive benefit. There is some research out there to show that it helps with learning, it helps with memory, it helps kind of improving your attention and your focus. But the longer that you nap, and I feel like a lot of people listening can relate to this, is then we get into something called sleep inertia. And the longer the nap, so if we're getting into 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour, longer than that, then we're dipping down into the deeper stages of sleep. So whenever our alarm goes off and it's time to wake up and get back to work or whatever we were doing, well, we're getting pulled out of deeper stages of sleep, and it's much more this groggy, foggy, what year is it type of feeling, and that's what sleep inertia is. So that's why we kind of recommend, if you are going to nap, if you're someone who isn't having trouble already sleeping at night and you feel like you need a nap, yes, these are the parameters of do it before 2 p.m. and about 20 minutes is a sweet spot. And now something that's very new and very trendy is a nappuccino, which is also known as a caffeine nap. Yes. Isn't that just the sweetest name? A nappuccino. I think it's adorable. I don't know who came up with it. I wish I could take credit, but I can't. And so with the nappuccino, you're going to have caffeine, about 100 to 200 milligrams, maybe even a shot of espresso. And then you'll immediately go down for your nap. And the nap, again, will be about 20 minutes. And so what we find is that you've taken the caffeine takes a little while to get up and running. And while it's kind of working its magic in your system, you're relieving a little bit of that sleep pressure. So by the time you wake up 20 minutes later, the caffeine is at it's ready to rock and roll, and you've also had a little bit of a refresher. So what we find, and very interestingly enough, is that these nappuccinos are more effective than naps by itself and more effective than caffeine by itself. So if you are someone who is, and one thing I'll also say too, and I should have said this at the very beginning, is if you're someone who's in a situation where you're in danger, maybe like you mentioned, behind the wheel, and you are just in a situation where you may be unsafe, absolutely 100% stop what you're doing and go take a nap, go get to a place where, yes, you can be safe, because 100% whenever we are sleep deprived, that's when those micro sleeps start to take over, where like sleep just takes on a life of its own, and it wants to sleep, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, what you're up to, how important that activity is. So yes, first and foremost, do not ever put yourself in a place where you are in danger. Always take care of yourself. And then with all of that being said, so I should have said that first, the disclaimer about safety, and then napping, whether you're someone who has a hard time sleeping, maybe not the greatest idea for you. If you're someone who is a good sleeper and doesn't have issues, then naps may be an option with those caveats that I mentioned.
It's funny because the other day I fell asleep on the lounge. Like I just laid down and then I woke up and I was like, oh, what happened there? I had no idea. And then I was like, oh, I'm great now, and I was really good for the rest of the time. But that was me, like, actually needing that. And I feel that that's such an important thing you bring up, Dr. Leah. It's like you need to know when you do need to sleep, and you need to know when you do need to rest. And if you can't get into those cycles, like you said, finding ways and people to help you get back into those cycles, because especially with children, because I worked a lot with children who were really poor sleepers, and their parents would put them on melatonin, which would help them kind of fall asleep. Yeah, I don't love the whole melatonin thing, because then it replaces your body's ability to create the melatonin, if anyone's listening. But, it's really interesting. And then they're like, oh, but they don't stay asleep. I said, because their sleep cycle's out of whack. Like you actually need to restore their sleep cycle. It's really interesting, like just seeing how they come through. I'm bringing it up because you're the expert. Tell me.
I want to jump in here because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about melatonin. So melatonin, as you mentioned, is a naturally occurring hormone that our body makes. So just to give us a little science lesson real quick, is that if we think back to our caveman ancestors, we are very much ruled by the sun. So how did they know when it was time to be awake? The sun came up. How did we know whenever it was time to go to bed? The sun went down. And so that is how our brain is wired still to this day, even though it's been many years, many, many, many years later, that we're still very much driven by the light and the dark. And light is our most powerful cue whenever it comes to our sleep-wake cycle. Now, with all that being said, why? Light comes into our eyes, goes back to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is our main master timekeeper, if you will. And that speaks to the pineal gland, and the pineal gland will then release melatonin. So melatonin, and this is, I think, very important. So hey, listen up. Melatonin does not cause sleep. It doesn't initiate sleep. It lets the body know, hey, it's time for sleep, but it doesn't cause sleep. And I think that that's very important to mention because I hear this all the time, especially people who come to work with me one-on-one for sleep issues, is that they're taking melatonin thinking it's a sleeping pill. It is not a sleeping pill. And when I say this, again, a caveat here is if you're a shift worker or if you're someone who's jet lagged. Otherwise, for the most part, melatonin is not, your body naturally makes it. It is not something that you need to be taking, let alone on a daily basis, let alone for children. Because whenever it comes to melatonin, this is something that you can easily just grab off the shelf at your big box store. And there's been a lot of studies that show that even though it says melatonin on the label, and maybe it says X number of milligrams, well, whenever we take these and we send them off to a third-party lab to see, oh, is that actually what's inside of it? The studies show that there is a ton of variability whenever it comes to the actual amount of melatonin that is in the bottle, and if it's even matching what's on the label. And so it's so interesting because some of them may have very little concentrations, and then there's even a study to show that some of the bottles, what was actually inside of the gummy or the tablet, whatever it is that you are going to be ingesting, had over 400 and I want to say 78% more melatonin than what was actually on the label, which is just incredible because that's not something that you would ever find in your body. Those types of insane levels,
Yeah.
that's just not natural for the body. And so for those of you who are listening, please, unless you're jet lagged or unless you are a shift worker, that's a different story. But melatonin is not a sleeping pill. It is not a sedative. It is not, in fact, there's research out there to show that, people trying to take it that way, the research shows that it doesn't even help you fall asleep even 5 minutes faster. It's less than that. And off the top of my head, I can't remember, and I don't want to tell you wrong numbers, but it wasn't even 5 minutes faster. So for those of you who are spending your money on that, also too, remember, whenever you can just buy something off the shelf, unless you're buying something that is very high quality and does a lot of rigorous testing, a lot of times these products are made in facilities where there are things getting into the products that shouldn't be. So maybe lead, arsenic, mercury, things that should not be in our body. And so it's really important to know that melatonin isn't what you think it is. It's not a sleeping pill. And B, it may have very high concentrations. It may have very low concentrations compared to what's in the label. And then C, just depending upon the cleanliness standards of the facility that it's being made in, you may also be getting lots of other things in there that are not good for the body, should not be in the body. So yeah, I have a lot of strong feelings about melatonin and how it should be used, especially whenever it comes to children. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it there.
I understand. I will leave it at that too. I understand.
Yes.
And I guess following up from that, if you had something that people could take home quickly, like listening to this now, what is something that they could do to get back into a sleep rhythm so that their body actually gets used to, falling asleep and going to sleep, which is what melatonin's meant to do, apparently, but it's not. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's what, I'm a psychologist, so what it is that I do are a lot of behavioral and environmental modifications. So I would say a few things that people can do, whether it's adults or children, and I would say first thing in the morning, within an hour of waking up, go outside, do a little bit of movement, and look towards the sun, because again, our light is our strongest cue for sleep wake. And you're thinking, oh, well, why is she telling me this first thing in the morning? How is that going to help my sleep? Well, when the light comes into the eyes first thing in the morning, if there's any remaining naturally occurring melatonin that your body has made, then the pineal gland shuts it down. And then also the sun helps us feel alert and awake. It boosts that for us. And it helps us with some good chemicals to kind of get our day started, kind of these up and at 'em. let's go chemicals. So that's important. But also, as our day goes on, it's going to help us much later down the road feel sleepy when it's time to feel sleepy. Another thing you can do, I think that this is lovely. You may or may not have time to do this, but watching the sunset, I think it's beautiful. I think that
It's
it's relaxing. But also, as we move from the daytime and these light blue wavelengths and move into a place where we're getting a lot less of that and we're starting to see the darkness come on, that is also very helpful for our circadian rhythm. If you can't do that, or if you can in combination in your home, what I like to do whenever I can is to not use overheads at all and just have all the natural light coming in through the windows. And as the sun starts to set, I just let that dimness happen. And then eventually I'll turn on lamps. But it's really important that because we now have so much control over our overheads and everything else, that we start to dim the lights in our environment. So we're also telling the brain and the body it's time to wind down, it's time to get ready for sleep. I think this is really important, definitely for adults, because we figured it out with kids and babies, is that some type of wind down routine, right? Like for children, we probably do a bath. We pick out pajamas, we pick out our favorite stuffed animal, we read a book, we maybe like do a bedtime song, we turn out the lights. Like there's this whole ritual. And somehow as adults, we've gotten away from this. And I think that it's really important that we get back to having some type of wind down routine, because as adults and in this day and age, we're just so go, 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 so incredibly busy, so many things pulling and vying for our time and attention, that we think that we should just be able to go and push ourselves to the absolute limit and then be able to fall asleep immediately whenever we want to, whenever we lay our head down on the pillow. And that's simply not how it works. You need to have a transition period from being awake and being alert to this state of relaxation and calm that's going to be conducive to falling asleep. And I think that, again, I'm saying we do a lot of things to get into our own way. And that's one of them, is just not having any type of transition from the day into the evening, turning all of our bright lights on, engaging with things that are very dopamine inducing or very engaging or maybe very emotional as we get close to bed. So there's just a lot of things that we do to get into our own way, that if we just kind of rethink them, or again, as you like learn about the science behind it, I think that that's what's so powerful, is then you can start to make more informed choices, which will help you get to better sleep. So I think that those were just a few little free, easy tidbits that people can use.
I think that's amazing. And I feel it's so important too how you brought up the sun, especially the morning sun, like just staring at that. It's so calming to your soul. Like it's just this calming of like, oh, I'm awake and here's the sun and it's like kind of rising with me. And then, a lot of people don't realize that the colors in the sunset are actually like activating different things in your body as well. So, being able to stare at the sunset if you can and just take that moment as well. And personally, just as a human, just to take that moment and appreciate, wow, look how beautiful the
Mm-hmm.
sky is. That can be such a nice
Yeah.
thing to do too. But I love all those tips. They're so beautiful, Dr. Leah. Thank you. And as we start to wind up our time together, I ask the guests that come on the show, I already feel like I know your answer. If you could heal or change something in the world, what would it be?
Yeah, you already know what I'm going to say. Sleep. 100%. Everybody sleeps, and at some point in everyone's life, you will probably go through a phase where you're struggling with sleep. And I think, that's why I wrote this book, is If Sleep Were a Drug, to help people. I really want it to be this: what is sleep? Why do we sleep? How are we getting on our own way? How to modify, whether that's behavior, whether that's environment, and just kind of doing a lot of myth busting like we did here today, and then troubleshooting around having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, nightmares, um, you name it, and just really being a resource for people who are struggling, because at some point in your life, unless you're insanely lucky, you will struggle with sleep at some point. And I've just jam-packed this book with tons of information and strategies for you to try out. So that's what it's all about. So the answer is sleep.
Beautiful. And if people want to find you, I know your book's not out yet, but we'll make sure the link goes in the show notes. But if they want to connect with you with other ways, how can they find you?
Yes. So my name is Dr. Leah Kaler, and that's my website, that's my LinkedIn, that's my social media. So everywhere you can find me at Dr. Leah Kaler.
Beautiful. And I'll put all the links in the show notes as well. But Thank you, Dr. Leah, for squishing some sleep myths, but also for giving those practical tools to get back into a beautiful rhythm and to remind people not to have a 3-hour power nap in the middle of the day and wonder why they can't sleep. Except for children,
Yes.
except for little children still need that, so, but big
Yes.
kids know.
Yes. Child sleep is very different. Thank you for making
Exactly.
that distinction.
Yes, exactly, exactly. But thank you so much, Dr. Leah. I really love this conversation. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you for listening to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We have so much love and gratitude that you have taken the time out of your day to empower you on your healing journey. The views shared by the person being interviewed might not necessarily reflect that of the host and should be used at your own discernment. Trust what resonates for you and follow your heart and soul guidance. If you have any underlying medical conditions or mental health issues, please consult with your healthcare provider before pursuing any of the recommendations. Likewise, you can always contact the person being interviewed to find out more information. This can be found in the show notes. Remember to activate, align, heal, empower, and find love in everything that you do.